Good evening. My name is Jonathan Kaplan. I'm the director of the Schusterman Center for Jewish Studies and a faculty member in the Department of Middle Eastern Studies here at the University of Texas at Austin. On behalf of the center and its affiliated faculty, I would like to welcome you to this evening's screening and discussion of the documentary Remembrance and Ritual, Reflections on Eva and the Angel of Death. Today, January 27th, has been designated by the United Nations General Assembly as International Holocaust Remembrance Day and was chosen because it marks the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Today, we commemorate the 77th anniversary of that liberation. This evening, we will engage in remembering the Holocaust and honoring the lives of those who were murdered by the Nazis through viewing a documentary produced by Density 512. The documentary, Remembrance and Ritual, Reflections on Eva and the Angel of Death, recounts the production of the Holocaust Remembrance opera, Eva and the Angel of Death, by composer Dr. Thomas B. Yee and librettist Aiden K. Feltkamp. The opera narrates the amazing story of Holocaust survivor Eva Moses Kor. Eva, along with her twin sister Miriam, survived Auschwitz and while there were subjected to human experimentation under the direction of Dr. Josef Mengele. She went on to found the organization Candles after the Holocaust in 1984, an acronym for Children of Auschwitz Nazi Deadly Lab Experiments Survivors, and received international attention for publicly forgiving Nazis for what had been done to her, which was the subject of the 2006 documentary, Forgiving Dr. Mengele. Tonight, we are joined in the audience by Dr. Alexander Kor, the son of Eva and Mickey Kor. This evening's panel is being held using the Zoom webinar platform. After viewing the documentary and approximately 20 to 25 minutes of conversation among our panelists, Dr. Art Markman, who is the Vice Provost and Professor of Psychology here at UT Austin, Dr. Tatjana Lichtenstein, Associate Professor of History here at the university, Dr. Thomas Yee, composer, Jacob Schnitzer, conductor and filmmaker, and moderated by Dr. Bob Abzug, Rapoport Regents Chair of Jewish Study Emeritus here at the university. Following their discussion, we will have some time for Q&A from our audience. During the panel discussion itself, I encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen if you are on a computer, the top if you're on an iPad. Please ask questions as you have them during the panel discussion, but we ask that you refrain from asking them during the viewing of the documentary itself. I will help to curate the questions at the end of our time together, and our moderator, Dr. Robert Abzug, will pose them to our panelists. I would like to extend my thanks to Density 512 for their work in collaborating on tonight's event. In addition, this event is being co-sponsored by the following units at UT Austin: the Department of American Studies, the Department of Germanic Studies, the Center for European Studies, the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies, the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy, the Humanities Institute, and the Butler School of Music at the College of Fine Arts. I would like to thank publicly Sablin Arden and Nicole Farrell at the Schusterman Center for their work on organizing this event. It is now my great pleasure to welcome Jacob Schnitzer, conductor and filmmaker, to introduce this evening's documentary.
Hello, thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Jacob Schnitzer. I am the co-artistic director and executive director of Density 512, which is a contemporary chamber orchestra and new music collective based in Austin. Our biggest project of the year is the world premiere of the opera Eva and the Angel of Death by composer Thomas B. Yee, who you will meet later this evening, and Aiden Feltkamp, a librettist based in New York City right now. We were going to put on this performance in April 2020, and we can all imagine what happened to that. So in the vacuum of us not being able to perform the work, we were left asking, what can we do to share Eva Moses-Kor's story in the meantime? And the answer to that was creating this documentary film about the opera and about Eva's life and story, which we're going to experience together here this evening. As a producer and conductor and artist, 2 years ago, I was worried mostly about the music and getting the performance together, but making this documentary film gave me and all of our creative team more time to dig into Eva's life story and to go deeper and deeper in letting it resonate throughout who we are as people. One of the most remarkable things about creating this film was the opportunity to look at archival photos and video from Eva's life provided to us by Dr. Kaur, who's here with us, and also by other people who Eva was close with. Before we watch, there are just two pieces in our film that I'd like to make a little note of so we can look out for. I had seen a picture of Eva and her twin sister Miriam leaving Auschwitz, and it's this black and white photo. They're hand in hand, and you might have seen it on the poster of this event, where Eva in her adult life is standing next to this still blown up image. And in looking through archival video of the liberation of Auschwitz, I saw this frame. I was like, I've seen this before. And sure enough, it was the actual video of Eva and Miriam walking hand in hand in a line of children outside of Auschwitz. It's a very special thing to see, and really brought home, that Eva's a real person who existed physically in the world, and there was a camera there watching her come out, and it just brings you right into that moment. The other thing that we were privileged to have the opportunity to experience, and I hope you will also feel the same, is archival video of Eva delivering her declaration of amnesty in Auschwitz on the 50th anniversary of the liberation. It's truly one of the most remarkable speeches I've seen in my life, and challenges me to be a better person every day. So our performance of Eva and the Angel of Death will take place on April 23rd and 24th at the Austin Central Library. I believe Dr. Kaplan just put the link for tickets. So if after seeing this film, you're moved to come see the opera, I very much encourage you to join us. We also today, in commemoration of the liberation of Auschwitz, released a small album of some musical excerpts from Eva and the Angel of Death. So I'll drop that link here for you all. There it is. So anyways, I thank you all for joining us. I hope you will find Eva's story as moving as we do. And I hope you will accept it as an offering of peace, hope, and healing. Thank you.
Eva is a hero in every sense of the word.
Eva is a survivor. Eva was a person with an extraordinary story.
Eva went on to live a life of substance.
Eva is a champion of truth.
To me, Eva is about being bold and speaking out against hatred when you see it.
Eva is a devoted sister.
Eva is an inspiration to be more than what you've been through.
Eva is a healer.
Someone who other generations can look up to.
A woman of compassion, the light against the darkness.
An inspiration to be more human and to be whole.
The messenger for today, which is why we need to tell her story.
I accidentally stumbled on the cure from victimhood. I didn't look for it, I just happened to stumble in it, and I feel that I am somehow privileged. Every human being who has been hurt, damaged, victimized, has the human right to free themselves from that victimization, and they are the only ones who can do it. So this is the story. From the moment that I saw the dead bodies on the latrine, it hit me that that can happen to me, and I made a silent pledge that I will never let it happen to me. I have to survive it and make it one more day. That was always the uppermost thing in my mind. When I was in Auschwitz, I thought if I would just relax, that I would die.
Her story resonates with me not just as an artist portraying her work, but very personally, to learn about a person who has been through what she went through, lost as much as she lost, and just lived her life so fully and not without joy. So when I play Eva, I feel like I have to be 10 different things at once. She's a child, but she has to grow up so quickly. So she's experiencing this horrific, traumatic event, but the entire time she's also thinking about her sister. So I think about my younger sister, Gabby, and the lengths that I would go to protect her if she were in danger or if her life was at stake.
When it came to setting Eva's story, as I started to read more and learn more and ultimately to interview Eva, it really left an impression on who I am as a person.
It was really exciting to meet Eva. I've done quite a bit of historical fiction, and I never get to meet the people that I write about. So it's exciting to read their words and watch their interviews and then actually meet them in person.
So Eva came out and we went back to interview her, and from the get-go, she was just a fiery individual. She had so much spirit.
She just reminds me of like my own grandmother. She's like making fun of my hair and commenting about, where I live, or it's just really funny. It brought it all into perspective in a way that I've not experienced before in my historical work.
I heard that you used to go to the opera with your sister in Cluj.
Cluj, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because my aunt was a big opera buff. And I said to my aunt, I don't like any show that they are singing from the beginning to the end. Because I am not very musical. So you're a musical person?
Growing up, I was on percussion and piano, and then I wanted to write, the music.
Yeah, but as you write your song, don't get into the gruesome details of the gas chamber. No, because I don't really think that it's necessary to really describe the details for people to understand that people were dying there.
Right.
And the Nazis were so evil, and they felt good about it.
Joseph Mengele was the doctor who worked at Auschwitz, and he performed the twin experiments, which Eva and Miriam were part of. He was really interested in genetics and wanted to see if twins who were genetically similar, or exactly the same, if they were identical twins, how they would react and change over time, how they would deal in these certain situations.
We are taken to experiment 6 days a week. Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday was the blood lab. They took a lot of blood. They would just simply tie the arm here and also the right arm to restrict the blood flow. So they would take blood from my left arm. In my right arm, the injections were given with big needles, each injection 1 needle. It was painful. I would count the needles. I never saw the needles going in. I wouldn't look at it. And I would think that after the 5th one, maybe that was it. At times there was a 6th and a 7th.
Dehumanization was a key feature of the concentration camps in general, but was definitely a key feature of Mengele's work. He didn't see them as people. He saw them as lesser than, as non-human.
Without intervention, evolution will repeat itself, 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 repeat itself. Like the dinosaurs, before us greatness will abandon.
Ist nun der wütendsten Rasse in Europa.
It's important to observe what has happened in the past so that we can move on to the future. The fact that this happened not too long ago, and we're still living in times where there's just so much civil unrest and race is being discriminated against, killings happening, unnecessary killings just because of someone's race, just because of someone's belief, or just because of who someone loves.
Particularly when it comes to
speaking about important moments like the Holocaust, I very strongly believe that we have to tell those stories. We have to keep those stories alive, because if we don't tell them, then we are doomed to repeat them.
But the truth is we are doing it again, right? We have kids in cages in this state who might not ever see their parents again.
Growing up Jewish, I was taught to recognize what it looks like when people and governments seek to take power by dehumanizing and victimizing others. Today, we see that more than ever in my lifetime. We had literal Nazis and white supremacists marching in Charlottesville. We had insurrectionists storm the Capitol. Our leaders dehumanize and speak terrible things about the most vulnerable people in society. As a Jew, as an artist, and a person in this world, I feel an enormous responsibility to name that.
So I think Eva's story is really important to tell in opera, that every life has value.
I feel sorry for them. What kind of a miserable mind would get up in the morning and say how many people I can kill? I would not want to live in a mind like that. But it's always evil, and it always doesn't make any sense. And during a terrible depression, they had to find a scapegoat. And because Jews are only not even .%. So it's always easy to pick on the Jews, because who will stand up for the Jews? Very few people. And right now we see anti-Semitism again.
Look at this shit! This is beautiful! Holy shit! Woo! You will not replace us! People coming down the stairs. You will not replace us! You will not replace us!
You see me now, and I look good.
I love the vest. It's amazing.
You like that?
The blue, yeah, it's very good.
And your scarf, it's very colorful.
I have lots of blue scarves, and people buy me all kind of blue scarves. Wanted to show you where our barrack was. Okay. All right. Our barrack was right here, the second barrack from here, from the corner. So we would be walked from here, almost just crossing the camp and leaving. So this is the whole size of the camp. That is, the blood lab was very close to our barrack. We didn't go, and we walked from it. But to the experiment where we were sitting naked for 8 hours, that was in Auschwitz I. We also walked there, but that took an hour and a half to get there.
Auschwitz was liberated by the Soviet Red Army, and liberation came when no one expected it. Eva and Miriam were separated for the first time. Eva had been at the hospital recovering from a deathly illness that she'd gotten as part of the experiments. Eva was desperate to find Miriam. The camp was in chaos, and she just had to find her sister. Eva was so afraid that if she didn't find Miriam during this time, that they would never see each other again.
Miriam,
in 1992, it was very strange. I had 3 nightmares that I was with my sister exactly every night, the same thing. She collapsed in my arms and she was bleeding. And after the 3rd night that I had the same crazy nightmare, I called until finally I reached my brother-in-law and said, Miriam is dying, she's in the hospital. I have never buried any member of my family, and I wanted to say goodbye to her. I also wanted to say goodbye to my kidney she was carrying with her. My brother-in-law said, we cannot wait for you, the funeral is in 10 hours. So I was left with a lot of pain, and I didn't really know the ways that would express itself, but I would wake up suffocating. I could feel how she died. Her lungs were filled with cancer, and I was afraid to go back to sleep. One month after she died, I received a telephone call from a professor at Boston College, and he said to me, I have heard you speak, and I want you to come to Boston College. I agreed. And then he said, when you come to Boston College, I would like you to bring a Nazi doctor with you. The last project that Miriam and I worked on before she died, we finished a documentary done by a German television about the Mengele twins. And when I received a copy of that film, there was a Nazi doctor in the film interviewed. I contacted him with the translator, and I invited him to come to Boston. Well, he said he said, I'm too old, I am not going to travel to the United States, and my health is not that good, but I'm willing to meet with you at my house in Germany. Dr. Munch was very kind, very open. He shook my hand, and we were sitting on metal chairs. Well, he was 82 at the time, Dr. Munch, and he went back into the house 5 times, and each time he came back with a pillow that he handed me, not to anybody else, just me. I asked him, I said, excuse me, Dr. Munch, what are you trying to do? He said, well, I want to make sure you are comfortable on these metal chairs. I said, I said to Dr. Munch, Dr. Munch, you were in Auschwitz when I was there, right? Did you ever walk by the gas chamber? Did you ever go into the gas chamber? Do you know how the gas chambers operated? And he said, yes, that's a nightmare that I have every day. He was stationed outside looking through a peephole to see what was going on. The canisters were opened outside the roof, dropped through opening that fell to the floor. It operated like dry ice, so the gas was rising from the floor. And as it was hitting, people started suffocating, so they would climb on top of each other, forming a little mountain of intermingled bodies. And Dr. Munch looked when he saw that the people on the top of the pile stopped moving. He signed one death certificate. No names, of course, just the number of people that were murdered. None of those death certificates have been found. What I said to him, Dr. Munch, that is important information. I am going to Auschwitz in 1995. I want you to go with me. I want you to sign a document at the ruins of the gas chamber in the company of witnesses, what you just told me. And he said to me immediately, I would love to do it. So now I'm coming back to Terre Haute, Indiana, so excited that I will have an original document signed by a Nazi. And I wanted to thank him. And 10 months after that, one morning I woke up and I said, how about a letter of forgiveness from me to him? I knew right away that he would find it a meaningful gift. I wrote the forgiveness letter, which I call Declaration of Amnesty, for the 50th anniversary to the liberation of Auschwitz. I didn't think that the survivors would understand it or like it, but I was not going to be going back to being a victim again. I made a list of 20 words relating to the experiments. I read those words clear and loud. And I said after I finished reading them, in spite of all that, I forgive you. And it made me feel unbelievably good to even have the power over the angel of death of Auschwitz to forgive him. And if I forgave Mengele, the worst of them, then I might as well forgive everybody who has ever hurt me. And let me tell you, I forgave everybody.
It makes you feel good. Does it make you feel like you have done something that... A twin who survived as a child Joseph Mengele's experiment at Auschwitz 50 years ago, hereby give amnesty to all Nazis who participated directly or indirectly in the murder of my family and millions of others. I extend this amnesty to all governments who protected Nazi criminals for 50 years, then covered up their acts and covered up their cover-up. 50 years after liberation, from Auschwitz, I, Eva Moses Ford, in my name only, give this amnesty because it's time to go on. It's time to forgive, but not forget. It's time to heal our souls. It's time to open all classified and personal files, not only for the sake of history, but to alleviate human suffering. I, a citizen of the free world, declare here at Auschwitz that I have the human right to locate my Auschwitz file, so I know what germs and chemicals were injected into my body 50 years ago. I expect the leaders of the world to put politics aside and, for the sake of all humanity, assist us in getting our files. Help us make it possible for every Mengele guinea pig, for every survivor, to find their files, their stories, their past. I, the only living member of a very large family, in their name and mine, appeal to the U.S. Congress, to the Israeli Knesset, to the German legislatures, and to others who have the power to pass laws dismantling all Nazi-related investigative units, such as the U.S. Justice Department Office of Special Investigation, and open up all the Nazi files to survivors and the public. Look up to the sky. Here in Auschwitz, the souls of millions of victims are with us. And I am saying with them as my witness, enough is enough. 50 years, it's more than enough. I am healed inside. Therefore, it gives me no joy to see any Nazi criminal in jail, nor do I want to see any harm come to Joseph Mengele, the Mengele family, or their business corporations. I urge all former Nazis to come forward to testify to the crimes they have committed without fear of any persecution. Here in Auschwitz, I hope in some small way to send the world a message of forgiveness, a message of peace, a message of hope, a message of healing. No more wars, no more experiments without informed consent, no more gas chambers, no more bombs, no more hatred, no more killing, and no more Auschwitz. I'm signing this document January 27, 1995. Eva.
How do you live differently because of Eva's story?
So that's a super personal question, and I might regret saying this on camera, but I'm going to say it because it happens to a lot of people. I think that the most difficult thing that ever happened to me was that I was raped by somebody who I loved and trusted, and that I'm not alone in that. That's right. That's the majority of sexual assault cases. But I resented it, and I felt just horrible anxiety every time I had to be around them. And I was letting that really run my days and run my choices and my newer, healthier relationships. Earlier this year, after I knew I was going to play this role and I read Eva's book and I did a lot of research, it made me really think twice about the power of forgiveness. And so I went back and kind of read through some letters and really forgave that person, like truly 100% forgave them. And it just felt like I was a different person when I made that decision. And my relationships with the people around me changed in a really positive way. So thanks, Eva.
I don't know how I can ask you other questions.
Well, it's the truth.
Take a piece of paper, write on it whatever you want to say about that terrible event. At the bottom of the letter, you have to be aware of that. You have to write the word, I forgive you, and mean that. Do not mail the letter. The letter is for you to know that you are free from that terrible event. And you are going to live on your life, and you have the human right.
Now, I resonated with Eva's search and in some aspects of the trauma that she felt, just from reflecting on some of my past with racially based discrimination and bullying from my childhood. However, it was Eva who taught me through forgiveness that those experiences don't have to define who you are today.
This story is about forgiveness and healing.
It's hard to comprehend and fathom with my own life experience.
We've all been through a lot in the last 4 years, but really the last decade. You know, the world is it's a scary place right now.
This year has pretty much just been a terrible year for a lot of people, so just listening more and checking up on people and just making sure that I'm the best version of myself.
I think art is ultimately what's going to help us heal from this moment.
When art responds to the world around it, it brings a sense of immediacy and power.
Because I believe that if you are emotionally stirred, that you will act.
Well, I mean, I am a mom already, and I have another one on the way, and I think about the world, and I hope that the world continues to heal and be a forgiving place for my children.
We cannot wait to share Eva's story with you.
What I discovered for myself was life-changing. The whole idea that I had the power to forgive, no one could give me that power, no one could take it away from me, it was all mine. Once you are victimized, most people do not know how to heal themselves. You are in control of your life. I get up every morning and I say, I'm still alive. That's pretty good. And then second thing I say, what can I do today to make the world better?
Hi, and thanks to all of you for coming to see this very moving story. Our panelists tonight we'll be discussing what we've seen and its broader implications. It's a very special honor to have the composer, as well as Jacob, the all-powerful, who sort of put this together, but the composer of some beautiful music, Thomas Yee. And I'd like to start off by asking him to say some words about the production of that score. Thomas?
Thank you, Dr. Abzug. So I was thinking about how to frame this discussion of music and Holocaust remembrance, since this is an opera of Holocaust remembrance. And I found myself coming back to this question of why this story? Why tell this story? And why tell this story now? Of course, I think there are many things that we can point to that the documentary did point to about the resonances that Eva's story has with our own stories in our own time and place, whether that be in regard to racial discrimination and hatred, whether that be in regard to the potential for personal healing and the long-term trauma experienced, even on the societal level about the polarization that we face in our society. And yet, the more that I thought about this, the more that I came back to just thinking that this is a story that I wanted to tell as a composer, because it was a story that could be told, because it was a story to be told. And I think story is something that's very powerful, and for me is a way into thinking about how music interacts with Holocaust remembrance. Henry Greenspan, in his book, Interviewing Holocaust Survivors, has written that stories and the tradition that they convey are thus only truly known when they are retold. We find ourselves kind of in a gap from the era of moral witness, where you have the Holocaust survivors themselves coming forward and telling their stories and testifying, to a point where many Holocaust survivors, such as Eva herself, who was in Auschwitz when she was very young, at the age of 10, have now passed away. And it is now turning over to a new generation to continue to retell their stories, passing from a time period of this moral witness into cultural memory. And I think that's where art comes in, where art is something that excels at that cultural memory piece, at keeping stories alive in some aspect of the individual's own experience. So when I come back to why tell Eva's story and why tell it now, what I come back to is not to try to elevate it above other stories, not to try to say this is the story that of how a survivor's experience should be, but merely to say this is how it could be. This is how one survivor has indeed experienced their own story. And so when it comes to music, music for me is at the incredible intersection of art and of culture, and also of history. This idea of a Holocaust remembrance opera that's based in history, but gets to really flesh out something about the experience of that person's story. And so where music comes in, I think, is really speaking to the heart and to the emotions, to the mind, how one experiences internal changes within oneself. And music, I think, is ideal as an art form to being able to try to convey something about that experience from the survivor. And so I've done my utmost as a composer to just try to take some of what I've learned from Eva, how she herself has changed my life, and how I interpret her story as an artist today, and try to communicate that through the music. For me, the music is ultimately about that, is about communication, something trying to convey some aspect of Eva's experience to the listeners and to the audience who is present. And that's what I hope that the opera premiering on April 23rd and 24th will do. I think if you found the art here in this documentary powerful, our hope is to present an even more powerful and immediate work in the Austin Library on those dates.
Okay.
Well, yes, Dr. Abzug?
I thought you were finished. That's all.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to pass it off to the panel.
Okay, let's hear from Tatjana Lichtenstein from the History Department at UT. Tatjana, as well as being simply a professor of history, teaches courses on the Holocaust. Tatjana.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Thomas, also, and Jacob. We started talking about this project a couple of years ago, so it's really wonderful to see it come to fruition. And, you know, the way I experienced the project, it's of course a really powerful message about victim self-empowerment, victims who resist letting the harm inflicted by perpetrators dominate their lives, right? Instead of demanding perpetrators admit their crimes or held accountable, they simply decide to forgive them. So that message is very powerful, and I think, wonderfully also communicated with the music as you just described. But having said that, and I'm speaking as a historian here in response to the piece's message, I am a bit uncomfortable with the narrative of individuals forgiving as the road to healing. And I want to be absolutely clear that what victimized individuals choose to do to feel empowered, to heal, to break free from victimization, I completely respect those choices. That's not what I'm sort of uncomfortable with or want to kind of bring up. What unsettles me is the implication that it somehow is victimized people's responsibility to tell us how to deal with perpetrators or victimizers past and present. I'm concerned that we are sort of, by focusing on forgiveness and celebrating that exclusively in some ways, we are letting ourselves off the hook. Because surely it is our responsibility as citizens and neighbors to uphold the moral standards of our society, whether it is not to kill, not to rape, not to steal, not to maim. Holding perpetrators accountable by investigating what they did and why they did it, as do historians and journalists, legal professionals, and ideally law enforcement. That does not preclude forgiveness, empathy, and healing. In fact, I think that broader process, the development in this specific case, when we're talking about a Holocaust survivor and issues of forgiveness and trauma, the development of a mainstream understanding of what the Nazi genocide was, and I would say mostly shared, but definitely that has been called into question by recent events, but a mostly shared consensus that it was a crime, the genocide, and that the Nazi regime itself is sort of an embodiment of evil, right? That consensus, that broad societal consensus, is a precondition, I believe, for victims to then forgive, to heal, to free themselves of their victimization. What I'm trying to say is that I find Eva's work, the work that she did, the educational work, the philosophical work, the moral work, very compelling, and I'm really moved by the ways your film showed that it resonated with artists and with people around the world. But I think victims' ability to find meaning and empowerment in forgiveness depends on the creation of that consensus, that a crime was committed against them. Whether it's genocide or sexual violence, a broader recognition of the wrongs perpetrated, I think, is a necessary step. So we have a responsibility, us as now the storytellers, right? Now the ones that are going to remember, right? As she also implores us not to forget, we have a responsibility to name and hold people accountable for the crimes they commit against others. Forgiveness may be the road to healing, but I don't see that it can come about without a thorough, honest, and evidence-based reckoning with history, with the perpetrators and with the systems that enabled and continue to enable them. Indeed, I wonder again that if this isn't a necessary preconditions for victims to heal, much in the way that Eva proposed. So I want to finish there and hand it over to the next person.
Thanks, Tatjana. The next person is Professor Art Markman of the Department of Psychology and various other programs, and actually now in the Provost's office. So, Art.
Thanks so much, Bob, and Thomas and Jacob. Thank you for putting this film together. Really, I'm honored to be a part of this. And Tatjana, I enjoyed your remarks, and maybe we'll have some fun discussion as this moves forward. I do want to talk a little bit both about history of the field of psychology, which Bob Abzug, you're also quite an expert on, as well as the concept of forgiveness. You know, it's fascinating to me that the field of social psychology has its roots actually in the Holocaust. That many European Jews and some American Jews really were some of the early leaders in the field of social psychology as it emerged in the 1950s and the early 1960s. And some of the names, Stanley Milgram, certainly somebody that many people have heard of with his obedience studies, but Solomon Asch and Stan Schachter and Leon Festinger. In many ways, these psychologists were focused on the perpetrators of evil. A lot of the roots of social psychology were really in trying to understand the social forces that might lead individuals to commit unspeakable acts, and to ask the question: were people in the people under the Nazi regime, were they evil people, or were they people who were acting as people in an evil situation? And in fact, much of that research seemed to suggest that all of us have the capacity to act in evil ways under circumstances in which we conform to other people who are pushing us to do things that are evil. Now, what's fascinating about this research is that there much less research in that early social psychology was really focused on the victims of evil and of how they can go about a process of healing. There were strands. You had people like Viktor Frankl who were really trying to understand those processes, but really not as much work focused on that process of healing from being a victim. And what's fascinating is, if you fast forward, the concept of forgiveness and the psychological aspects of forgiveness have been a topic of much more recent study. And what that research does find is that forgiveness primarily benefits the forgiver. So it is in the act of forgiving someone else that it allows you to look forward again and not just backwards. And so for many people who have been victimized, the period prior to forgiveness is often focused from a memory standpoint exclusively on what happened in the past. And that what the act of forgiveness enables is the ability also to look forward and to begin to think about what your life will look like moving forward. Now, as the film, as Eva in the film points out, and as I think Tatjana was saying as well, forgiveness cannot mean forgetting, and it cannot mean a willingness to paper over the things that have happened in the past. And it may very well be that part of that road to forgiveness has to go through an understanding of what happened in the past. But it also has to be, we also have to recognize in that forgiveness that we have an obligation to help ensure that the things that caused that victimhood in the past don't happen again. And so I think those themes come through really, really beautifully in this film, and I'm looking forward to the continued discussion.
Thanks, Art. And Jacob, you have some final words after hearing us. Where are you? There you are.
So in this discussion on the issue of the forgiveness and whether it is appropriate, I really feel this is like perhaps one of the central tensions in this story, and I thank Dr. Lichtenstein for bringing it up, because it's like it's one of those qualms that I think gives the story much of its power. To try to put yourself in Eva's shoes, making that decision feels unfathomable in so many ways. And yet I from working with the cast on putting this production together, I can see how it has transformed people's lives. And the question of accountability and truth being like a precondition. In doing more research into Eva's story and the way she would frame this, she talks very clearly about how one cannot forgive if they are still in danger. Like safety is a precondition of that act. You can't, you can't let go of a danger that is still present. And one of the things that I've personally been grappling with is that there are dangers that feel present now in the lives that we're living. And, when the appropriate time to, personally let go, it feels like just an ethical, and personal quandary at all times for me. But I'll point to just one moment that we saw in the film that I didn't know was coming, and it just happened when talking to the cast. But when Paige, at the beginning of the epilogue, starts to tell her story of the trauma that she experienced, you can see physically, like she's tight and her shoulders are here. And the moment where she says, "and then I forgave," there's this breath. She goes, and you can just see like the trauma leave her, and she's relaxed and like able to move on with her life. And witnessing that in real time during the filming of this was just a really powerful moment that I think about a lot. And I really think that this conversation we're having is in many ways at the heart of Eva's story, and at the heart of the question of like, how do we incorporate Eva's story with our lives? And when are the times that are healthy, and when are the times that are maybe not for us to do that? And I think that's all, these are all things worth lingering upon.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to add one thing. I'm going to take the privilege of being the moderator to tell one story, which is that in 2001, I was part of a film team that was creating a movie about a Holocaust survivor and his sister. Very much, they weren't medical experiments were not done on them, but they had a pretty tough time. And part of the story was literally them debating. Henry was all for forgiveness, and his sister was all for, forget it, I'm not getting near Germany. This is alive in me. What's interesting, we took them to Krakow, where they grew up in Poland, and Henry had forgotten every word of Polish he ever knew, and couldn't find the house where they grew up. Whereas his sister was fluent, was our translator much of the time, and led us right to where they grew up. In other words, there are costs maybe, but the biggest point I want to make is that Eva, as somebody did make, Eva's story is one story, but the fact is Holocaust survivors are as varied in their psychology as the people who are here on this panel and people who are in the audience. And it's just, there are certain things we have together, but not everything. Okay, we have a question that's probably directed best toward Thomas and Jacob. Really two-part question from Richard Novak. In the documentary, Eva gave instruction not to write about the horrible acts that took place at Auschwitz. Did she give any other requests regarding the opera? Was she able to read the libretto, hear any musical examples? And did she speak about the fact that her personal forgiveness might not be embraced by others?
I believe this question comes from Rick, who is playing the role of Dr. Mengele in the upcoming production. So nice to see you here. Thomas, do you want to answer the first and I'll handle the second?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. Okay. So in the first question, as far as just the creative part of the opera goes, the second part of that question is quick and easy to answer. Eva unfortunately was not able to review any parts of the music or the libretto, although I do believe we sent the libretto by her family, I think Dr. Kaur, to sort of give a once-over and review it. But Eva passed away in the summer of 2019, before our original premiere date. And I finished the opera sort of in its final draft form somewhere in the fall of 2019. So it wouldn't have been available for her to review at that time. For the first part of the question, no specific requirements like that she stated, other than not to dwell overly much on sort of the gruesome and gritty details of being within Auschwitz. But one thing that I can say that both Aiden and I made a priority for ourselves is to try to tell the story in this opera, both musically and poetically, the way that Eva herself would tell it. And so that's why we went to interview her, to hear it from her mouth. That's why we read her memoir and read the documentary, reading her speeches on the Candles Holocaust Museum and Education Center website. And so I think in all ways we've tried to honor Eva's story by making sure that its message and how her story is told is done in a way consistent with how she herself told it. And I think that we've achieved that.
And in fact, if you read Eva's memoir, you'll read lines that are directly in the libretto. So many of the words that you'll hear in the opera are not even words imagined, but they are hers.
Mm-hmm.
On the second question, there's the bed of the documentary of Eva speaking is from an interview that Thomas and Aiden had with her, and we have a little over an hour of interviews, so there are all of these stories and moments that we weren't able to share, but there's this story that she tells of going to an event with a large community of survivors, and she said this man comes up to her and gives her a hug, and she didn't know who he was, and he goes, "Eva, it's so nice to see you." And she goes, "Oh, you've heard of me? You must love my forgiveness." And he goes, "No, Eva, I hate your forgiveness." And just to have had that interaction with people who didn't feel that was the right thing to do, that was very much a part of her life. And I think one thing that I can see in her, though, is that wasn't like, there was that tension there, but she, through what she had done, was okay with it and cool with it and relaxed and happy through her life, even though there were people who didn't embrace what she had done.
Let me go to the next question from Sarah Blatt. This is for Tatjana Lichtenstein. You said she wouldn't tell survivors how they should reclaim power, but it really sounded like she did. I think she's referred to Eva, not to you. And Eva very clearly said that this process of forgiveness worked for her, but that it didn't mean it would work for others. She also did call out the Nazis, and specifically the doctor with her, for their crimes. She used the word evil, and not lightly either. And she asked for additional information on the specifics of the crimes, so her forgiveness did not put a blanket over the past evils. That's really more a statement than a question, but it relates to virtually every comment so far. So I'm going to go on to the next one because that's self-evident. From Leah Hollingshead for Tatjana. To what extent do artists and storytellers have an obligation to explicitly convey that the Holocaust was a crime? how do artists find balance between discussing the morality of traumatic events versus telling the story of how victims have moved on?
Thank you for that, and for the other comment as well. So I'm not asking the opera to teach us about the Holocaust, you know, in sort of the basic historical chronology and all the events and all this kind. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that, and I'm going to say it a little bit sort of as a caricature, but just to kind of make my point, that we look to investigating, punishing perpetrators, understanding why they did it and how to hold them accountable is extremely complicated, as we've seen since the Second World War, right? We're just speaking of acts of genocide. Basically, much too little, much too late. It is very complicated, right? Very, very few people have ever been held accountable. So in focusing on forgiveness, and as Eva says, no more trials, right? She says that in her statement, no more trials, let's move on, let's move forward, right? And that, I'm not disrespecting that on a personal level, I'm saying it is letting us, right, as a society who upholds moral standards, off the hook, because we can say, okay, she's moved on, so now we don't need to ponder the difficulty of actually holding people accountable. And the accountability, right, whether that is exposing, as we, like the Me Too movement, right, is an obviously example where sexual violence, people's experience of sexual violence suddenly could be articulated by a lot of people, including people in the group of artists in this opera. The same with genocide, the same with the Tulsa race massacre, right? Like all of these things need a public space in which victims can be, their experiences are acknowledged as crimes. They don't have to convince us. So I'm just saying, I want to hear victims' voices, obviously, and I totally respect how anybody moves forward. That is none of my business to tell anybody how to do that. But I think that from a historical perspective, certainly when you're looking at victims of mass violence and genocide, you need a public space that is listening and that's willing to do that in order for people to actually be able to tell their stories and move forward. So that's my point. It's not, the opera is not a history lesson, but it's relying on a basic understanding of the Holocaust that only came through research and trials.
Right. Let me just chime in on that one little point. Maybe Art, certainly me, we're the old folks here, don't you think? And we probably both remember when in fact there was no space for survivors to say much of anything about their experience. They didn't even, in many cases, and I know many, many cases of this among my friends, they were very reticent about saying anything about their experiences to their children, even. And this speaks to our responsibility to open up that public space. And that has happened, happily, or unhappily, in the sense of, you know, what they're talking about. But it's, I don't think before about 1965, 1968, 70, there were very many Holocaust survivors who would talk about their experience. One of the reasons why Elie Wiesel, his book Night, is so celebrated is because it was one of the few narratives of survivors for years. Now there are many, but that, you know, this is our responsibility as people who surround survivors of all sorts. And I think this relates to Me Too as well. Giving men or women the opportunity to talk about being assaulted in one way or another. This is very important. And I think less, but I go back to your point, Tatjana, that less important perhaps it is to tell them to forgive or not to forgive. That's something they can do. and it's up to their individual experience. But the public space to say something is really an important one.
And I think there's incredible power in storytelling and in art to transport the listener and the watcher and the hearer into a space that is the one that the storyteller has set up. And the obligation there is to help the audience there to feel something that they haven't felt before, and that's something that is a fascinatingly human element that we can use our stories and our artwork to transport people in that way, and what that enables us to do is to experience things that we don't have a firsthand opportunity to experience, to hear the stories of other people's trials and travails, and also to sometimes to see a path towards healing that we may not be able to see. I think one of the ways that stories, Bob, you mentioned Elie Wiesel, from his stories on forward to Eva's stories, these are stories that both acknowledge the grim reality of the Holocaust and point a particular way forward to healing, which can be powerful for anyone who feels at some moment imprisoned by things that have happened in their past, to know that there is a possibility of moving on from that, whether they're ready to do it yet or not. And I think that that's another power that stories can have and that artistry can have.
Any other, let's see, Alex Carr, son. Good evening. Well, here, can you read it, Alex? Well, I guess not. You're not on a mic. Okay. Good evening to all. I do not have a question and I'm enjoying the discussion. I greatly appreciate all of you and especially Thomas and Jacob. I would like to clarify a few things. One, my mom knew that her forgiveness was not popular and would be heavily criticized. I told her this much as well. Two, regarding Professor Lichtenstein's comments on forgiveness, my mom in no way wanted Nazis to have a free pass. Justice was important to her. If my mom were still here, she would likely say that if she were waiting for Mengele to be on trial, she would have never forgiven. I look forward to seeing you all in April. Very interesting. Thank you, Alex.
Can I jump in there, Dr. Abzug?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, so just a couple of comments on the threads so far. Just one brief one about sort of from an artistic standpoint, and then another on this topic of forgiveness. I guess really resonating with what Dr. Lichtenstein and Dr. Markman both have shared. So first, from a creative standpoint, we have the opera that's set in 2 acts. The first act is set when Eva is 10, and it's set in Auschwitz from the selection platform to liberation. And the second act is 50 years later when Eva is 60 and contemplating this act of reading the Declaration of Amnesty for Forgiveness. And that's dealing with the long-term psychological effects of her sister's death and of her experience. And I think the opera really consists of both acts. It would be incomplete without one or the other. So if we only told the story of Eva seeking healing through forgiveness, then I think it would be incomplete as a representation and a remembrance act of the Holocaust. And if we only told the first act, then I think it would be incomplete without seeing where Eva's story led her. Now, for the second part of my remark here, I wanted to sort of use my position as the artist advocate for the subject of the narrative and really try to speak in Eva's own voice by reading from her remarks on forgiveness from posted on the Candles Holocaust Museum and Education Center. I think what this shows is that Eva really would agree with Dr. Lichtenstein's remarks about the prior consensus as a precondition about the Holocaust, about the independence, that forgiveness is not a judicial statement. So let me just read a few of these words. Forgiving is not forgetting. In many cases, it is impossible to forget events that deeply affect our lives. They shape our lives for better or for worse. Forgiving does not mean that we condone the evil deeds of the Nazis or other perpetrators. The question of justice is separate from the issue of forgiveness. And then echoing what Jacob mentioned earlier, When we are in a place where our lives are in direct danger, the mindset of survival sets in, and survival and forgiveness do not go together. We can forgive only after the violence has ended and the victim is at peace with his or her surroundings and wants to heal that chapter of his or her life. So just with reading that, I think that there's quite a bit of synergy there between Eva's own words and what Dr. Lichtenstein has expressed tonight.
Hannah, any other comments you'd like to add?
I'd like to pull on a thread from Dr. Markman's comments about art's role in putting us in the position of empathy, and also about Dr. Lichtenstein's comments about this as a historical piece. And one other thread, a conversation that I had over lunch with Dr. Abzug about this particular performance. You know, one thing that we are not trying to do in this opera is to tell the story of the Holocaust. Like everything that happened. I mean, opera is just not the appropriate form to do that. You know, books and documentation, and that's the place to do that. What we're trying to do is to tell one person's life story in a way such that the audience feels as if they have some personal connection with that story. It would just simply be too much to tell, you know, everything that happened. And in much media about the Holocaust, it's the tone is so like the mechanistic way in which everything happened creates this like alienation or separation between us as audience members and viewers and from what happened. It's almost that like it's too much and we can't take it all in. And by focusing on one person's story, her experience as a child going through it, but then also as an adult in the 1990s, not too far away from our own time, it allows us to make a personal connection and a way in a way where if we were trying to tell more than we could with this, we just couldn't emotionally get there. So I think that one of the contributions of this opera to the broader discourse is to humanize a survivor as a person with a family and kids and a life in Indiana, and to show that Eva too was like us.
Mm-hmm. We have another question from Brandon. I guess it's Mond or Mond. Did Eva share what forgiveness made possible in her life? What changed for her personally once she decided to forgive? That's probably, you guys know her best, except for her son.
Right, of course, Dr. Core in the audience. Well, I mean, I think I'm going to do a cop-out again, except it's not really a cop-out given the nature of the question, but just reading from Eva's statement of forgiveness here on the Candles website. And I think one of the things that is interesting is that when Eva's making these descriptions, she can sound so enraptured by the effect that forgiveness has had in her life that for some it can sound as if she's saying like this is the only way to find these things. And I think that's part of what has like given rise to some of the tensions or the different interpretations that we've seen. But at least for my interpretation of Eva's words, I see her as just advocating this as an option and a potential powerful option for one to take. So she writes, "Forgiveness unclutters one's mind in life, permitting us to view the world through unobstructed vision, see the beauty around us, be open to new positive experiences, and embrace the wonderful people in the wonderful world that we meet. Forgiveness, in my opinion, brings serenity, healing, respect, freedom, peace, and love. Forgiveness provides the choice to live in peace and be happy instead." And so I think that those words from Eva answer some of those things that she felt forgiveness brought to her life.
And one thing that we get a tiny glimpse into in the film, just by hearing the way that Eva interacted with Thomas and with Aiden, is she just has this like force of life behind her. Mm-hmm. And there's this little moment that Aiden says, "I like your scarf," and she goes, "Oh, I look good." I mean, you can just feel that she is a person who's full of joy that radiates from her to touch other people. And I mean, that certainly is a factor, and one thing that came from her forgiveness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she loved and found the joy in McDonald's chicken nuggets, and at her.
Everybody has a difference.
Yeah, and so I remember for seeing all the people that her life had touched, and being in the room before her funeral service and or memorial service, excuse me, and just having a bunch of McDonald's chicken nuggets there and enjoying those, and sort of getting to try some of Eva's favorite food, and just that zest for life, I think is very striking.
Okay. Let me close with one question. I think we're about there, right, Jonathan? Which is something that Tatjana and I know very well, that there's a generational, there's a generational challenge here. The actual knowledge of what happened, historians know more and more and more, social scientists, artists produce more nuanced and wonderful work. But generally speaking, our students at a very fine university often know very little. And, or if they think they know a lot because they learned it, if they're Jewish, they learned it in Sunday school and whatever, that is a challenge to keep actually not only these very personal images, which are very important, but also the historical context. Not so much in terms of forgiveness or not forgiveness, that people have to decide. But in terms of saying this happened, and I could just give you one instance of a course I taught with a Romani colleague of mine here at UT. We had a seminar of 16 people, and they took it out of curiosity because who are these Romani, that is gypsies, known as, and it was extraordinary what they didn't know, but it's also extraordinary how much they appreciated learning what they didn't know at the beginning. And I think, again, I think Tatjana's experience, my experience is that these are very important courses to teach. It's very important to refer our students to novels, to documentaries, to operas, to symphonies, whatever, and to painting, to the arts. So on that note, thank you all for your questions and for being here with us. And thanks Tatjana, Thomas, Jacob, Art, and maybe me. But in any case, and Jonathan, of course. And I hope, I know I'll be there to see it. And I hope that lots of people who are here tonight will come in April, stage 3 permitting or something like that. We'll see. Okay, Jonathan?
Thank you, Dr. Abzug. And again, I want to extend thanks to Jacob and Thomas and Dr. Markman and Dr. Lichtenstein for being a part of this evening, and particularly to Jacob and Thomas for sharing your wonderful work with us and deepening our understanding of Eva's testimony and what she brought to the world and her unique gift to the world. We thank you for that and look forward to sharing in experiencing Thomas's wonderful work in April. Thank you. And to all of you who are here tonight, thank you, and we wish you a wonderful evening.
Thanks. Take care. There we go.